The crystal glass trembled in my hand as his laughter sliced through the boardroom like a cold blade. "Oh, wait, you're just the coffee girl, right?" Oliver Whitmore, Jr., his voice dripped with the contempt of someone who'd never paid for his actions. 12 directors around the table offered polite chuckles, their eyes sliding past me as if I were merely decoration. He had no idea. He'd just opened a war he couldn't win. My name is Samantha Cole, and I've spent 34 years learning that revenge, like good wine, requires patience and the perfect temperature to serve. The Whitmore Global Ventures boardroom stretched before me like a battlefield of polished mahogany and leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline, where September rain traced lazy patterns against the glass. I stood at the corner of the room in my crisp catering uniform, black vest, white shirt, the invisible armor of the service industry. "More water, Mr. Whitmore?" I kept my voice neutral, professional, as I approached the head of the table where Oliver Whitmore, Jr. held court. He didn't look up from his phone, just lifted his glass an inch off the table, the universal gesture of the entitled expecting service. As I poured, he was mid-story about his weekend in the Hamptons, gesturing wildly enough that I had to pull back to avoid his flailing hand. And I told them, either we close by Friday or I'm walking. You should have seen their faces when he finally noticed me, his eyes doing that quick scan men like him always do. Assessing, dismissing, all in a fraction of a second. "Actually, hold on." He raised his voice, addressing the room. "Isn't this perfect? We're discussing service industry acquisitions, and we have a real-life service worker right here." He turned to me with a smile that never reached his eyes. "What's your take on the gig economy, sweetheart?" The room chuckled. I saw CFO Margaret Chen hide her discomfort behind her coffee cup. The others waited to see how Oliver's little show would play out. "I just pour the coffee, sir," I replied, allowing a slight tremor in my voice, the perfect touch of intimidation they expected. "Exactly," Oliver slapped the table. "She just pours the coffee. That's the beauty of it. Simple labor, simple minds, simple solutions." He looked around the room, basking in his perceived wisdom. "This is why our automation initiative will revolutionize—" "Oh, wait." He squinted at my name tag with theatrical surprise. "Samantha? That's a pretty ambitious name for a coffee girl. Your parents must have had high hopes." More laughter, though quieter this time. I noticed Evan Whitmore, Oliver's younger brother, shifting uncomfortably in his seat at the far end of the table. "Well, Samantha," Oliver continued, drawing out my name like it was a punchline. "Since you're here, why don't you tell us? What's it like being replaceable? Must be scary knowing a machine could do your job better, cheaper, and without asking for health insurance." I set down the water pitcher with careful precision, letting the soft clink fill the silence. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Whitmore. Being replaceable is educational. You learn to pay attention to details others miss. You become invisible enough to see how things really work." Something in my tone made him pause, but only for a moment. His ego quickly smoothed over any ripple of unease. "Fascinating insight from the help," he said, already turning back to his audience. "Now, as I was saying about the quarterly projections." I retreated to my corner, hands steady despite the fire burning in my chest. 3 months I'd been doing this. 3 months of serving coffee, clearing plates, being furniture with a pulse. Every dismissive comment, every casual cruelty. I cataloged and stored like ammunition. The meeting droned on. Acquisitions, mergers, numbers that meant nothing to them beyond scorekeeping in their endless game. I watched Oliver command the room with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. His father, Oliver Sr., sat at the opposite end of the table, occasionally nodding but mostly staring at documents with an expression I'd learned to recognize, the careful concentration of someone struggling to keep up. When I refilled Oliver Sr.'s coffee, I noticed his hand shake slightly as he reached for the cup. His eyes met mine for a brief moment. There was something there. A flicker of recognition that we both existed outside Oliver Jr. Spotlight. Then it was gone, and he was back to his papers. The meeting concluded with Oliver Jr. promising aggressive expansion and revolutionary changes that would reshape the industry landscape. The board members filed out, leaving their casual chaos for me to clean, scattered papers, coffee rings on the pristine table, the detritus of power. Oliver was the last to leave, on a phone call about dinner reservations at some restaurant where the waiting list was 6 months unless you were a Whitmore. As he passed, he knocked over his water glass, deliberately, I was certain. The liquid spreading across the table toward the electronics. Oops, he said into his phone, not even glancing back. The coffee girl will get that. I watched him disappear into the elevator, his laughter echoing down the hallway. Then I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, adding to the growing file I'd labeled simply O.W. Week 12, pattern confirmed. Tuesday. Board meetings, always runs over. Father showing increased confusion with financial reports. Marriage tension visible. Wife called 3 times during meeting. All declined. Mentioned brother Evan with usual contempt. Gambling debt discussion with CFO after others left. Vegas, 6 figures. 3 months of this, and Oliver Whitmore Jr. had given me everything I needed. He just didn't know it yet. As I cleaned the water from the table, I allowed myself a small smile. He thought I was just the coffee girl. In truth, I was something far more dangerous. I was patient, I was invisible. And I was 3 months into a plan that started the day he destroyed my sister's life. The photograph lived in my wallet, tucked behind my driver's license where I could feel its edges through the leather. Laura Cole, 3 years older than me. Accepting her Employee of the Year award at Whitmore's subsidiary Apex Marketing. Her smile in that photo was genuine, the kind that reached her eyes and made her whole face glow. That was before Oliver Whitmore Jr. decided she was his type. I sat in my studio apartment that night after the board meeting. Laptop open to a spreadsheet that had nothing to do with Excel and everything to do with justice. Each column meticulously tracked Oliver's patterns, weaknesses, relationships. 3 months of careful observation distilled into actionable intelligence. But to understand why I was serving coffee to the man I despised most in this world, you had to understand what he did to Laura. 18 months ago, Laura was rising star at Apex Marketing, recently promoted to Assistant Director of Strategic Communications. She'd earned it, 60-hour weeks, innovative campaigns, client relationships she'd built from nothing. Oliver had taken notice during a quarterly review. He always noticed the pretty ones who were too smart for their own good. It started with compliments about her presentations, then invitations to strategy dinners that were clearly something else. Laura, professional to her core, deflected gracefully. She documented everything in emails to HR that went nowhere. Oliver's family owned the parent company, after all. The breaking point came at a company retreat in Aspen. Oliver, drunk on whiskey and his own invincibility, cornered Laura in the hotel bar. When she refused his advance, loudly, publicly, with witnesses, he laughed it off. You're overthinking this, but, sweetheart, I was just being friendly. Within a week, Laura's computer was mysteriously wiped. Projects she'd spent months developing vanished. Emails disappeared from servers. Then came the rumors, whispers that she'd been stealing credit for others' work, that she'd fabricated her credentials, that she was unstable. Oliver's network was vast and loyal. When he decided to destroy someone, it was surgical. The final blow was an accusation of embezzlement. Nothing provable, of course, but enough to force her resignation to avoid legal complications. Her reputation was ash. No marketing firm in New York would touch her. The woman who'd built campaigns for Fortune 500 companies couldn't get an interview at a startup. I found Laura in her apartment 2 months later, surrounded by rejection letters and empty wine bottles. She'd lost weight, lost her spark, lost herself. He won, she told me, her voice hollow. Men like Oliver always win. No, I'd said, holding her while she cried. They only win if we let them. Laura moved to Oregon to stay with our aunt, to heal, to try to rebuild somewhere Oliver's shadow didn't reach. The day she left, I stood in Penn Station and made a promise, not for revenge, exactly, but for balance. Oliver had tipped the scales so far in his favor, I would simply tip them back. My plan required proximity and invisibility. Oliver would never remember meeting me. I'd been nobody at Laura's company events, just the younger sister who sometimes picked her up after office parties. But I remembered him. I studied him. Elite Catering Services provided my entry point. They handled all of Whitmore Global's events, and they were always hiring. The turnover was brutal, long hours, demanding clients, minimal pay, perfect for someone who needed to disappear into the background. My first day serving at Whitmore Global, I'd been terrified Oliver would recognize me, but he looked through me like I was furniture, the help, invisible. It was exactly what I needed. Over weeks, I learned the ecosystem. Oliver had inherited his father's ambition, but none of his intelligence. He compensated with cruelty and connections. His marriage to Isabel was transactional. Her father owned shipping routes Oliver needed for his expansion vision. His younger brother Evan was the opposite, thoughtful, kind, the son who should have inherited the kingdom but lacked Oliver's killer instinct. The gambling debts were recent, accumulated during what Oliver called networking trips to Vegas and Atlantic City. $600,000 hidden from his wife, his father, the board. He paid minimums to keep the wolves at bay, but the interest was crushing him. He'd started siphoning funds from discretionary accounts. Nothing traceable yet, but sloppy enough for someone paying attention. And then there was Oliver Sr.'s condition. The patriarch was struggling, forgetting names, confusing numbers, covering lapses with bravado. Oliver Jr. knew and said nothing, positioning himself as the obvious successor while his father's mind frayed at the edges. Every Tuesday, I served their coffee and absorbed their secrets. Oliver's contempt for his brother, Evan couldn't run a lemonade stand. His paranoia about Isabel. She's been distant, probably fucking her trainer. His disdain for his father. Old man's losing it, about time. 3 months of Tuesdays, and I had enough ammunition to destroy him 10 times over. But destruction wasn't the goal. Laura's life hadn't been destroyed, after all. It had been dismantled piece by piece, professionally, until she had no choice but to surrender. Oliver deserved the same careful deconstruction. I closed my laptop and pulled out Laura's photo again. She texted me that morning from Oregon. She'd gotten a job at a small nonprofit. Nothing like her old position, but it was a start. She was healing, slowly. "He's going to pay," I whispered to her photo. "Not all at once, not obviously, but when I'm done, Oliver Whitmore Jr. will understand what it feels like to have everything you've built crumble while you watch, helpless to stop it." The plan was already in motion. Oliver just didn't know he was playing a game where I'd already written the ending. The hardest part wasn't becoming invisible. It was staying that way when every fiber of my being wanted to throw hot coffee in Oliver Whitmore Jr.'s smug face. Elite Catering Services operated out of a cramped office in Queens, run by Mariah Santos, a woman who'd built her business on one principle. Rich people paid premium prices to not think about details. My interview lasted 5 minutes. "Can you carry a tray without dropping it?" "Yes." "Can you keep your mouth shut when clients say stupid things?" "Absolutely." "You're hired." Whitmore Global every Tuesday, Goldman Sachs Thursdays, various events weekends. Don't be late. Don't be noticed. Don't be noticed. If only Maria knew that was exactly why I was there. My first week was reconnaissance. I learned the building's rhythms. Security changed shifts at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. The executive elevator required a key card after 8 p.m. And the boardroom had a blind spot near the southeast corner where the security camera's angle couldn't quite reach. That's where I positioned myself during meetings, iPad hidden behind a serving tray, recording everything. The Whitmore Global building was a 50-story testament to corporate excess. Oliver's office occupied half of the 48th floor, with a private bathroom larger than my apartment and a bar stocked with bottles worth more than my monthly rent. But it was the details that mattered. The hidden safe behind the Monet reproduction. The second phone he kept in his desk's locked drawer. The way he always paced when talking to his bookie. By week 3, I'd established myself as part of the furniture. The executives stopped noticing when I entered rooms, ceased their conversations less frequently. I was just Samantha, the quiet one who remembered their coffee preferences and never made eye contact. That's when I started hearing the real intelligence. "Told you not to call me here," Oliver hissed into his second phone one Tuesday, not noticing I'd entered to refresh the coffee station. "I'll have your money by the end of the month." "Yes, all 600. "Don't threaten me. You know who my father is." I memorized the number when he set the phone down. Later, a reverse lookup revealed it belonged to Vincent Vinny Torino, a man whose legitimate business interests were as thin as Oliver's hairline was becoming. Week 5 brought the revelation about Evan. The younger Whitmore's son had started a sustainable technology firm 2 years ago, focused on renewable energy solutions for commercial buildings. It should have succeeded. The contracts were lined up. The technology was solid. But mysteriously, one by one, his investors pulled out. His biggest client canceled the day before signing. "Remember when Evan thought he could play businessman?" Oliver laughed to his CFO during a break. God, the look on his face when Hartman Industries pulled their contract. He actually asked me for help. I told him failure builds character. The CFO, Marcus Webb, shifted uncomfortably. That was unfortunate timing for him. Timing had nothing to do with it. Oliver smirked. "You think I'd let my baby brother show me up? I made 3 phone calls. Hartman owed me a favor. Morrison was easy to convince. And Chen, well, she always does what I suggest." Evan's little green dream died in a week. I was refilling Marcus's water glass. My hand didn't shake, but I wanted to empty the entire pitcher over Oliver's head. Instead, I noted every name, every detail. Evan wasn't just collateral damage. He'd been specifically targeted by his own brother. Week 7 revealed the marriage fractures. Isabel Whitmore came to the office unexpectedly one afternoon, designer heels clicking like a countdown timer. I was arranging pastries in the conference room when their argument echoed through the walls. 600,000, Oliver, gambling? You're going through my papers. Your papers, that's our money you're throwing away in Vegas. Your father's money, you mean, which became my money when I married you. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. When Isabel emerged, her makeup was still perfect, but her hands trembled as she passed me. Oliver followed, grabbing her arm. "Not here," she said quietly, but with steel underneath. "We'll discuss this at home." "There's nothing to discuss," he replied. "I handle the finances. You handle looking pretty at galas." She pulled free and left without another word. Oliver turned and saw me watching. For a moment, something flickered across his face, not embarrassment, but annoyance that the help had witnessed a crack in his armor. "Don't you have something to clean?" he snapped. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." I dropped my eyes, playing the submissive role while memorizing the exact shade of desperation in his voice. But the most valuable intelligence came from pattern recognition. Oliver Sr.'s decline was accelerating. During board meetings, he'd lose track mid-sentence, cover it with bluster, then look confused when his son smoothly took over. The board members exchanged glances but said nothing. Who challenges a Whitmore? I documented everything, every cruel comment about Evan, every desperate call to bookies, every sign of his father's deterioration that Oliver exploited rather than addressed, the code to his office safe, his birthday, the narcissist. The password to his second email account, Isabel's maiden name, the irony. The times he was most vulnerable, Tuesdays after 3 p.m., when the cocaine wore off but before the Adderall kicked in. 3 months of being invisible, of serving coffee while absorbing secrets like a sponge. 3 months of watching Oliver destroy others the way he'd destroyed Laura, casually, completely, without a second thought. By week 12, I had 16 hours of recorded conversations, 43 pages of typed notes, and photographs of documents Oliver had carelessly left visible on his desk. I had the blueprint to his destruction. But information without action is just gossip. It was time to stop observing and start orchestrating. The annual Whitmore Global Charity Gala was in 2 weeks. 500 guests, media coverage, the perfect stage for the first act of Oliver's downfall. As I left the building that final Tuesday of my reconnaissance phase, I passed Evan Whitmore in the lobby. He was kind enough to hold the door for the invisible catering girl. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something I recognized, the hollow look of someone Oliver had broken. "Thank you," I said. "Just returning the courtesy," he replied with a sad smile. "You're always so professional, even when my brother's being himself." If only he knew that his brother's cruelty had just signed his own warrant. The coffee girl was done serving. It was time to serve justice instead. Sterling Hall glittered like a jewelry box turned inside out. Crystal chandeliers casting rainbow fragments across 500 of New York's most powerful players. The Whitmore Global Annual Charity Gala, this year supporting youth literacy, though I doubted Oliver could spell philanthropy without autocorrect. I moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, champagne tray balanced, dodging elbows and ignoring the occasional hand that lingered too long when taking a glass. My uniform was slightly different tonight, still service black, but Maria had us in cocktail-appropriate attire for such events. Professional. Forgettable. Perfect. Oliver held court near the main bar. Isabel at his side in a burgundy gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. She smiled when she was supposed to, laughed at the right moments, but her eyes kept drifting to her phone. Oliver, meanwhile, was 3 scotches deep and getting louder with each sip. "The future of Whitmore Global has never been brighter," he proclaimed to a circle of investors. "Dad's built an empire, but empires need fresh blood, new vision. The transition is already happening, whether the old guard admits it or not." Oliver Sr. stood 20 feet away with board members, but his hearing was still sharp enough. His jaw tightened. This was my opening. I approached the investor group with a fresh tray, timing it perfectly as Oliver reached for another drink. James Patterson, the lead investor from Patterson Holdings, was asking about succession planning, a question Oliver had been deflecting all evening. "Succession?" Oliver laughed too loudly. "James, my father's not going anywhere. Though between you and me..." He leaned in conspiratorially, not noticing I'd positioned myself within earshot of both groups. "The old man's been forgetting things. Yesterday he called me David. That's my uncle who died 5 years ago. The board pretends not to notice, but someone needs to step up before he signs something he doesn't understand." The words carried. I watched Oliver Sr. face transform, confusion, hurt, then cold fury. Margaret Walsh from the board touched his arm gently, but he shook her off, striding toward his son with purpose I hadn't seen in months. "Oliver." The single word cut through the party noise like a blade. Oliver turned, his smile faltering as he saw his father's expression. "Dad, I was just discussing my mental capacity with our investors." Oliver Sr.'s voice was steady, lethal. "How thoughtful of you to handle that privately." The circle of investors stepped back, suddenly very interested in their drinks. Isabel's phone appeared in her hand. Recording. Interesting. "It's not like that," Oliver stammered. "I was explaining that you're still sharp, just occasionally." "Occasionally what? Forgetful? Confused? Unfit?" Each word was a hammer blow. "Tell me, son. When exactly were you planning to stage your coup? After the quarterly reports? Or were you hoping I'd conveniently have a stroke first?" The surrounding conversation died in waves as people noticed the confrontation. Oliver's face flushed red, anger, embarrassment, and scotch combining dangerously. "Someone has to think about the future," he shot back. "You're 71, Dad. You can't remember half the board members' names. Last week, you tried to approve a budget from 2019. And last week, you lost another 100,000 in Atlantic City. Oliver Sr. replied quietly. But in the hushed room, everyone heard. Did you think I didn't know? That I'm too senile to notice my son is bleeding the company dry to pay gambling debts? The silence was absolute. Isabel had stopped recording, her face pale. Oliver's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. That's ridiculous. Oliver managed. Is it? Should we discuss it with Vincent Torino? I believe he's called the office 12 times this month. Oliver Sr. pulled out his phone. I have the recordings if anyone's interested. I glided past with my tray, catching Oliver's eye for just a moment. Recognition flickered, not of who I was, but that somehow. This information had traveled from shadow to spotlight. His gaze swept the room. Paranoid now, seeing enemies everywhere. You know what? Oliver's voice cracked. At least I'm trying to modernize this company. You're stuck in the past, making decisions based on sentiment instead of profit. That's why Evan's little environmental venture had to fail. We can't afford pet projects. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Evan, who'd been by the dessert table, set down his plate with deliberate calm. Had to fail? Evan's voice was soft, dangerous. It didn't fail. Oliver, you killed it. Business is war, little brother. You weren't ready for my own brother sabotaging me? Evan stepped closer. I had everything lined up. Contracts, investors, clients. Then suddenly, mysteriously, they all disappeared. Was that you being protective? Or just eliminating competition? Oliver Sr. looked between his sons, understanding dawning. Oliver, tell me you didn't. I did what was necessary, Oliver exploded. This family only needs one successor, and it was never going to be Evan. He's soft, idealistic, weak. The slap came from Isabel. The sound echoed through Sterling Hall like a gunshot. Weak? She laughed bitterly. Evan started a company from nothing. You inherited everything and gambled it away. Who's weak? She turned to Oliver Sr. I want a divorce. My lawyer will contact yours Monday. Then to the crowd, with perfect poise. Please, everyone, enjoy the gala. Support youth literacy. God knows this family needs it. She walked out, head high, leaving Oliver standing in the wreckage of his own making. His father had turned away, discussing damage control with the board. Evan simply shook his head and disappeared into the crowd. The investors Oliver had been courting moments ago were suddenly fascinated by the charity auction across the room. Oliver stood alone in a sea of turned backs, his empire of cruel confidence crumbling in real time. He grabbed a champagne flute from my tray, his hand shaking enough to spill some, and downed it in one gulp. Rough night, Mr. Whitmore? I asked quietly, allowing myself the smallest smile. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in 3 months. There was something in his eyes, not recognition, but a dawning awareness that the invisible ones, the servants, the coffee girls, we see everything. You, he started, then stopped, unable to articulate the suspicion forming in his cocaine-addled brain. Me? I tilted my head innocently. I'm nobody, Mr. Whitmore. Just the coffee girl. I walked away, leaving him with an empty glass and emptier prospects. The first domino had fallen exactly as planned, and Oliver had pushed it himself. All I'd done was make sure the right people were standing close enough to watch. The charity gala raised $2 million for youth literacy that night. Oliver Whitmore, Jr. Reputation lost considerably more. The Whitmore estate on Lake Geneva stretched across 40 acres of manicured perfection, where even the wildflowers had been strategically placed. Their annual Memorial Day barbecue was legendary. Senators mixed with CEOs while their children played croquet on grass that looked like green velvet. This year, though, there was an undercurrent of tension thick as the humidity. 3 weeks had passed since the charity gala disaster. Oliver had managed to spin the narrative somewhat: stress, miscommunication, too much scotch, but the damage lingered. Isabel had filed for divorce, though she'd agreed to attend family functions during proceedings to maintain appearances. She arrived separately, spoke only when necessary, and kept her lawyer on speed dial. I was part of the catering crew again, Maria having secured the contract despite Oliver's growing paranoia about security. He'd even hired a private investigator to check the backgrounds of all service staff. Good thing Samantha Cole had no connection to Laura Cole, different addresses, different social circles, and I'd been careful to never appear in any of her social media from before. The lakeside mansion was a study in calculated casualness. Oliver worked the crowd like a politician facing recall, all charm and deflection. His father maintained careful distance, surrounded by board members who watched Oliver like scientists observing an unstable element. The house's layout was already mapped in my mind from studying the architectural plans filed with the county. Oliver's study was on the second floor, northeast corner, overlooking the lake. The wooden box containing his gambling evidence sat behind the leather-bound volumes of law books he'd never read. Third shelf, right side, behind, constitutional law, theory, and practice. I'd discovered this during a previous event when Oliver, drunk and careless, had retrieved documents from it while I was supposedly cleaning the adjacent bathroom. He never knew the door was cracked, that I could see the combination he used on the lock, 07-15-82, his birthday. Because men like Oliver think they're too important to forget. The barbecue was in full swing when I made my move. Oliver was outside, holding court by the grill. 3 bourbons deep and telling the story about acquiring a competitor's patents through creative negotiation. Isabel was by the pool, conspicuously alone, despite the crowd, scrolling through her phone with the focus of someone avoiding conversation. I volunteered to restock the upstairs bathroom supplies. Maria loved initiative. The hallway was empty, most guests preferring the lakeside views to indoor exploration. Oliver's study door was locked, but the $100 lockpick set from Amazon had been a worthwhile investment. 3 minutes, and I was in. The box was exactly where I'd seen it, covered in a thin layer of dust that suggested Oliver hadn't checked it recently. Inside, IOUs to various Vegas casinos, text message printouts discussing point spreads, a Polaroid of Oliver with Vincent Torino at a poker table, and most damning, bank statements from an account Isabel clearly didn't know about, showing withdrawals totaling $637,000 over 8 months. I didn't take anything. That would be too obvious. Instead, I photographed everything, then carefully displaced several books on the shelf. Not enough to look ransacked, just enough to seem like someone had been browsing. Then I moved the box itself, placing it behind Estate Planning for Dummies, a book Isabel had bought Oliver as a passive-aggressive Christmas gift last year. The genius wasn't in moving it, it was in knowing Isabel's habits. Every Whitmore family gathering, she escaped to Oliver's study at least once to use the private bathroom, the only one in the house where she could lock the door and avoid small talk. She'd mentioned it to her sister on a phone call I'd overheard. It's my 5-minute sanctuary from his family's judgment. I relocked the door and returned downstairs, arms full of paper towels and soap dispensers, the perfect servant completing her duties. An hour later, like clockwork, I saw Isabel slip away from the crowd. Oliver was now by the dock, demonstrating his new yacht to potential investors, completely oblivious. I positioned myself in the second-floor hallway, ostensibly cleaning already spotless surfaces. 5 minutes passed, then 10. At 15 minutes, I heard it. The sharp intake of breath, the sound of papers rustling. A whispered, "Oh my God!" Isabel emerged from the study, her face a masterclass in controlled fury. She held her phone in one hand, the wooden box tucked under her arm. Her eyes met mine in the hallway. "Samantha, isn't it?" she asked, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore." She studied me for a long moment, something calculating in her gaze. "Tell me, Samantha, do you believe in karma?" "I believe people usually get what they deserve," Ma'am. Indeed. She held up the box slightly. I was just looking for a book on estate planning. Funny what you find when you're searching for something else. Life's full of surprises, Mrs. Whitmore. She smiled then, sharp as winter. Yes, it is. If anyone asks, you haven't seen me. She disappeared into the master bedroom, emerging minutes later with a larger purse that concealed the box perfectly. I watched from the window as she walked down to the dock, where Oliver was still performing for his audience. The conversation was too distant to hear, but the body language was poetry. Isabel whispered something in Oliver's ear. His face went white, then red. He grabbed her arm. She held up her phone, recording, presumably. He let go. She walked back to the house with measured steps while Oliver stood frozen on the dock, investors asking if everything was all right. He managed to nod, but his eyes were scanning the windows of his study, calculating how she'd found it. Who else might know? The rest of the barbecue passed in a blur of strained normalcy. Oliver returned to the party, but he was distracted, constantly checking his phone, disappearing for hushed conversations. Isabel left early, citing a headache, but not before having a long conversation with Oliver Sr. by the garden, showing him something on her phone that made his face darken. As the sun set over Lake Geneva, painting the water blood orange, I cleared plates and glasses from tables where conversations had turned from stock portfolios to whispered speculation. Oliver's empire wasn't built on solid ground. It was built on other people's silence, and that silence was breaking. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. I hadn't stolen anything, hadn't fabricated evidence, hadn't technically done anything illegal. I'd simply ensured that the truth Oliver had hidden ended up in the hands of the person who deserved to know it most. By the time I left that evening, Oliver had retreated to his study, probably confirming what he already knew. His insurance policy against the world had just become evidence for his wife's divorce lawyer. The muffled sound of glass breaking came from his window. A Waterford crystal decanter, if I had to guess, worth about $3,000. The cost of keeping secrets, it seemed, was going up. The announcement was supposed to be Oliver's coronation. Vice President of Strategic Development, a title created specifically for him, with a salary that would make Wall Street bankers weep. The family dinner to celebrate was scheduled for the private dining room at Le Bernardin, because Oliver never missed a chance to remind everyone he could get reservations anywhere. 6 weeks had passed since the lakeside barbecue. The divorce was getting uglier. Isabel's lawyer had the gambling evidence, and Oliver's prenup had a moral turpitude clause he'd apparently forgotten about. He'd been living in the corporate apartment, pretending everything was normal while hemorrhaging money to lawyers and increasingly impatient bookies. I wasn't supposed to be working this event. It was family only, intimate, no outside catering needed. But Elite Catering handled the restaurant's overflow events, and Maria had asked me to deliver supplies to their kitchen that evening. Pure coincidence that I arrived just as the Whitmore family was gathering. The private dining room had glass panels along one wall, frosted for privacy but clear enough to see shadows moving inside. The attached terrace was empty. French doors opened to let in the September breeze. I could hear everything as I organized supplies in the adjacent service corridor. A toast, Oliver Sr., his voice carried clearly, to the future of Whitmore Global. The clink of glasses was notably unenthusiastic. Oliver Jr. was already drunk, his words slightly slurred. Finally, right? Only took 38 years for the old man to admit I'm ready. You're not ready. Evan's voice, quiet but firm. You're just the only option left. Excuse me? Come on, Oliver. We all know why you're getting this position. Dad needs someone to blame when the merger falls through. What merger? Oliver's confusion was genuine. Oliver Sr. sighed audibly. The one you would have known about if you'd attended any board meetings sober this month. Through the service window, I could see their shadows. Oliver standing, swaying slightly. Evan seated with perfect posture. Their parents at opposite ends of the table like referees. I've been dealing with personal issues, Oliver protested. Personal issues? Their mother, Patricia, finally spoke. Is that what we're calling embezzlement now? It wasn't embezzlement. It was a temporary... Stop. Oliver Sr.'s voice cut through. Just stop. We're giving you this position because the optics of not promoting you would be worse than the damage you'll do. But make no mistake, it's a leash, not a crown. The silence stretched taut. I moved closer to the service window, careful to stay in shadow. Oliver laughed, ugly and bitter. At least I'm trying to preserve what you built, not like Evan, running off to play Captain Planet with his little environmental fantasies. Those fantasies had 3 signed contracts before you sabotaged them. Evan replied calmly. Sabotaged? I saved you from embarrassing yourself. You think Morrison Industries was ever going to trust a Whitmore who drives a Prius? You're weak. Evan, always have been. Weak? Evan's chair scraped back. I built something from nothing. You've destroyed everything you've touched. Boys, Patricia started. No. Mom. Let him talk. Oliver's voice turned nasty. Let little Evan tell us all about his big ideas. Go ahead, tell them about your new venture. Oh wait, you can't afford one because I made sure every investor in the city knows you're a risk. The admission hung in the air like a lit fuse. You did what? Oliver Sr., his voice was dangerous. I protected the family brand. Evan's bleeding heart nonsense would have made us look soft. You destroyed your brother's company intentionally. Patricia's shock was genuine. Oliver, realizing his mistake too late, tried to backtrack. It wasn't like that. Yes, it was. Evan's voice was steady. Henderson pulled out after you told him I was unstable. Morrison canceled because you threatened to end Whitmore's contract with them. And Hartman? You got to him at your golf club. Promised him a better deal if he walked away from mine. You can't prove. I have the emails. Oliver. Evan pulled out his phone. Henderson felt guilty. Forwarded me everything last week. Your messages, your threats, your promises. All of it. Through the frosted glass, I saw Oliver lunge for the phone. The crash of plates followed, chairs overturning. But Evan was stronger than Oliver had ever given him credit for. Years of actual gym time versus Oliver's cocaine-fueled pseudo-energy. Enough, Oliver Sr. roared. Both of you, sit down. The shadows separated, furniture scraped back into place. Let me see those emails, Oliver Sr. demanded. The silence stretched for painful minutes as he read. I could hear Oliver's heavy breathing, Evan's calm composure, Patricia's soft crying. You didn't just sabotage him, Oliver Sr. finally said. You used my name, my reputation. You told these people I sanctioned this? The family comes first. The family? Oliver Sr. laughed bitterly. You destroyed your brother for sport. You've embarrassed us publicly, lost us millions in gambling debts. And now I find out you've been conducting corporate warfare using my authority? I'm your successor. You're nothing. The words were ice. The position is rescinded. Evan will take over strategic development. You can't. I can and I will. You'll keep your current title for appearances, but you're done advancing. Your corporate cards are frozen. Your signing authority is revoked. You'll show up, sit in your office, and try not to destroy anything else until I figure out how to minimize the damage you've caused. Dad, please, get out. This is because of Isabel, isn't it? That bitch poisoned you against me. The slap was loud enough to echo. Patricia Whitmore, society matron who'd never raised her voice, let alone her hand, had struck her eldest son. That woman gave you everything, she said quietly. And you threw it away for cards and dice. Get out of my sight. Oliver stormed out, slamming doors hard enough to shake the frosted glass. He passed right by me in the service corridor, too blind with rage to notice the coffee girl watching his world collapse. The remaining family sat in silence. Then Evan spoke, soft and wondering. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I should have done it years ago. Oliver Sr. replied. When he destroyed you, he showed me who he really is. I just didn't want to see it. I slipped away then, my work complete without lifting a finger. The truth, given the right conditions, was more destructive than any lie could ever be. As I left through the service entrance, I saw Oliver at the valet stand, screaming at some poor kid about his car. The heir apparent reduced to a titled figurehead, his empire nothing but smoke and broken mirrors. The best part? He'd done it all to himself. I just made sure everyone was watching when he did. The private dining room at the Whitmore estate glowed with warm candlelight, a stark contrast to the Cold War being waged around the mahogany table. 2 weeks had passed since Oliver lost his promotion at Le Bernardine. Tonight was supposed to be a reconciliation dinner, Patricia's attempt to heal the family wounds. She didn't know she'd scheduled the perfect finale. I moved between kitchen and dining room with practiced efficiency, part of a skeleton crew for this intimate family gathering. Oliver had fought against outside catering, but Patricia insisted she wanted everything perfect. No family members distracted by hosting duties. Oliver sat at his usual spot, right of his father, though the distance between them felt continental. He'd been drinking since afternoon. I'd seen the empty bottles in the library when I'd set up the bar. His eyes were bloodshot, darting between family members like a cornered animal seeking escape routes. Evan sat directly across from him, calm as still water. The past 2 weeks had transformed him. The uncertain younger brother was gone, replaced by someone who'd found his spine. He'd already started restructuring strategic development, reaching out to the very contacts Oliver had poisoned against him. "This salmon is exceptional," Patricia said, desperately filling silence. "Don't you think so, Oliver?" "It's fine," he muttered, pushing the fish around his plate like a sullen teenager. Evan's new initiative is showing promising numbers, Oliver Sr. offered, trying for neutral ground. The Henderson contract is back on the table. Oliver's fork clattered against his plate. Of course it is. Golden Boy gets everything handed back to him. Handed back? Evan's voice was measured. You mean what was stolen? I didn't steal anything. I protected this family from your amateur hour disaster waiting to happen. By lying? By using Dad's name without permission? By being realistic. Oliver's voice rose. You want to save the world with windmills and solar panels? This is business, not a charity. I refilled water glasses, invisible as wallpaper, while positioning myself perfectly to observe both brothers. It's the future, Evan replied simply. Every major corporation is moving towards sustainability. You'd know that if you spent less time at casinos and more time reading market trends. Oliver's face flushed purple. You sanctimonious little... Oliver, Patricia warned. No. Mother, I'm tired of this. Oliver stood, swaying slightly. Everyone acting like Evan's some kind of hero. You want to know the truth about your perfect son? Oliver, sit down. Oliver Sr. commanded. He's weak, always has been. Remember when he couldn't even close the Morrison deal without crying in the bathroom? I was 23, Evan said quietly. It was my first major negotiation. And I saved you. I've always saved you. Who convinced Morrison to give you a second chance? Who talked Dad out of pulling you from the program? You did, Evan acknowledged, right before you sabotaged every deal I made afterward. Oliver laughed, ugly and sharp. Sabotage? I was teaching you, making you stronger. You should thank me. Thank you. Evan's calm finally cracked. You destroyed my company. You humiliated me in front of the entire industry. Because you're not ready. You'll never be ready. This company needs a killer, not a Boy Scout. This company needs someone who isn't bleeding it dry to pay gambling debts. Evan shot back. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. What did you say? Oliver's voice was dangerous now. 600,000. Oliver, plus interest. Vincent Torino called Dad's office again yesterday. You little bastard. I'm not the one who bet against our own stock portfolio and lost. Oliver lunged across the table. Dishes flew. Wine splashed across the white tablecloth like blood. But Evan was ready this time. stepping back as Oliver crashed into empty chairs. You think you've won? Oliver scrambled up, wine staining his shirt. You think taking my position means anything? I still have connections. I still have… Nothing. Oliver Sr. interrupted, standing slowly. You have nothing. Oliver. The board voted this morning. You're being moved to a consulting position, work from home, no office, no authority. Oliver froze. You can't. It's done. Evan proposed it. I seconded it. The board unanimously approved. You're lucky we're not prosecuting for the unauthorized use of company funds. Company funds? Patricia gasped. Ask your son about the client entertainment expenses that went to covering his markers in Atlantic City. Oliver Sr. said coldly. I watched Oliver's world shatter in real time. His mother's disappointment, his father's disgust, Evan's pity. It was all there, reflected in his whiskey-dulled eyes. This is because of her, isn't it? Oliver turned suddenly, pointing at me. The coffee girl. She's been here for everything, every family disaster. She's watching, listening. The room turned to stare at me. I kept my expression neutral, professional. Mr. Whitmore, I'm just here to serve dinner. Bullshit, you've been spying, recording. Who hired you? Isabel? The board? Oliver, you're paranoid, Evan said. She's catering staff. No, I've seen her. Every Tuesday. Board meeting, the charity gala, the lake house. She's everywhere. He moved toward me, stumbling slightly. Who are you really? I stood my ground, meeting his eyes steadily. I'm nobody, Mr. Whitmore. Just someone who serves coffee to people who think they're too important to notice the help. You did this, he whispered. Somehow, you did this. No. Oliver, I said quietly, allowing myself the smallest smile. You did this. 3 months ago, you called me just the coffee girl and laughed. You were right, I am just the coffee girl. But coffee girls see everything, we hear everything, and sometimes we make sure the right people hear it too. His face went white as understanding dawned. But what could he say? That the service staff had orchestrated his downfall by letting him be himself? You should thank me, I added, echoing his earlier words to Evan. I taught you something valuable. Never underestimate the invisible people. We're the ones who know where all the bodies are buried. I walked out then, leaving the Whitmore family in stunned silence. My work was complete. Oliver Whitmore, Jr. had lost everything. His position, his marriage, his family's respect. Not through lies or manipulation, but by having his own truth exposed. As I passed through the kitchen, I removed my serving uniform for the last time. Samantha Cole was retiring. My sister Laura had called that morning. She'd gotten a job offer in New York again. Her reputation mysteriously rehabilitated after several industry leaders received anonymous packages documenting Oliver's systematic destruction of her career. The coffee girl was done serving. Justice had been delivered, hot and black. No sugar to sweeten the bitter taste Oliver would be living with for the rest of his life. The boardroom at Whitmore Global had never felt so empty, despite every seat being occupied. Oliver sat alone at the far end of the table, 30 feet from where his father held court with the board of directors. The distance was intentional, surgical, a visual representation of his exile. 3 weeks had passed since the dinner revelation. The Whitmore family machine had moved swiftly to contain the damage. Oliver's consulting position was a fiction, a face-saving measure that fooled no one. He had an email address, a salary continuation for 6 months, and absolutely no influence. I stood in my usual corner, serving coffee for what would be my final Tuesday board meeting. Maria had already accepted my resignation, though she didn't understand why her best server was leaving. You could manage your own catering company, she'd said. I'd smiled and told her I was ready for something different. The quarterly reports show a 15% increase since Evan took over strategic development. CFO Marcus Webb announced, the Henderson, Morrison, and Hartman contracts have all been successfully renegotiated. Oliver's jaw clenched. Every success of Evans was another nail in his coffin. Additionally, Marcus continued. The investigation into the unauthorized expenses has been concluded. While criminal charges won't be filed, the amount will be deducted from Oliver's severance package. What severance package? Oliver's voice cracked. I'm still an employee. For 3 more months, Oliver Sr. said coldly. Then your consulting position ends. The board feels it's appropriate. The room murmured agreement. Oliver looked around desperately, seeking one sympathetic face, finding none. Even his former allies had abandoned ship. This is insane, he protested. I built half the relationships in this company. The Singapore deal, the Morrison acquisition, were all actually negotiated by the team you took credit from. Margaret Davis interrupted. We've reviewed the records, Oliver. Your name is on the documents, but the work was never yours. The truth hung in the air like a funeral shroud. Oliver's entire career, built on stolen glory and family privilege, was being dissected in front of everyone. Evan spoke for the first time, his voice gentle but firm. Oliver, you need help. The gambling, the drinking. Don't you dare pity me, Oliver snarled. You won. Isn't that enough? Nobody won. Evan replied sadly. We're family. Your destruction isn't my victory. Oliver laughed bitterly. Family? You all threw me away the second I became inconvenient. No. Patricia Whitmore entered the boardroom unexpectedly, dressed in her traveling clothes. You threw us away every time you chose cruelty over compassion, every time you destroyed someone else to build yourself up. She placed divorce papers on the table. Not Isabel's. Those were already final. These were different. Dad? Oliver's voice became small, childlike. Your mother and I are separating. Oliver Sr. said quietly. She can't watch what you've become anymore, neither can I. The last pillar of Oliver's world crumbled. His mother, who'd always defended him, always made excuses, was walking away. This is because of her. Oliver suddenly pointed at me again. The coffee girl, she orchestrated all of this. Oliver, I said calmly, setting down the coffee pot. Even if that were true, what would it change? Did I force you to gamble? Did I make you destroy your brother's company? Did I put those cruel words in your mouth? He stared at me, recognition finally complete. You're related to Laura Cole, aren't you? The room went silent, all eyes on me. Laura Cole is my sister, I said simply. The woman whose career you destroyed 18 months ago. The woman you tried to assault, then buried professionally when she refused you. Gasps around the table. Oliver Sr. His face darkened further. You planned this, Oliver whispered. I planned nothing. I simply made sure people saw who you really are. Every cruel word, every betrayal, every crime, it was all you, Oliver. I just removed the shadows you were hiding in. I looked around the room, addressing everyone. For 3 months, I've served you coffee, cleaned your messes, been invisible furniture in your important meetings. You talked about destroying livelihoods like discussing the weather. You celebrated crushing competitors who were just people trying to build something. My eyes returned to Oliver. You taught me that in your world, the invisible don't matter. But you forgot something important. The invisible see everything. And sometimes, that's all the power we need. I removed my serving apron, folded it neatly on the side table. My sister has a new job now, a better one, actually. Henderson felt guilty about dropping her, offered her a senior position to make amends. She starts next month. I smiled. Funny how things work out. You destroyed my life, Oliver said hollowly. No, Oliver. You destroyed your life. I just made sure everyone watched while you did it. I walked toward the door, then turned for one last look. Oliver sat alone at the massive table, surrounded by empty chairs and the ghosts of every bridge he'd burned. His father discussing transition plans that didn't include him. His brother taking every opportunity Oliver had schemed for. His mother walking away without a backward glance. You were right about one thing, I said. I am just the coffee girl. But you should have remembered, Coffee girls know how everyone takes their drink. We know who's sleeping, who's alert, who's vulnerable. We see the trembling hands, the secret phone calls, the hidden documents. I smiled one last time. We know exactly when someone's about to spill. The door closed behind me with a soft click. Through the frosted glass, I could see Oliver's silhouette, slumped in his chair, finally understanding that his empire hadn't been conquered, it had committed suicide, and all I'd done was hand it the knife. Outside, the Manhattan morning was crisp and bright. Laura was waiting at the coffee shop across the street, nervous about her first day back in the city. "How did it go?" she asked. "It's finished," I said simply. "He knows who I am now. They all do." "Are you worried about retaliation?" I thought about Oliver, broken and powerless, stripped of everything that made him dangerous. "No," I said. "He's got nothing left to retaliate with. Just a name, a consulting title that expires in 3 months, and the knowledge that the coffee girl he dismissed destroyed him without breaking a single law." Laura hugged me tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," I said, returning the embrace. "Thank Oliver. He gave me everything I needed to destroy him. All I had to do was serve it back." We walked into the sunrise. Two sisters who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served in a Whitmore Global coffee cup, one careful pour at a time, until the empire drowns in its own bitter brew. Oliver Whitmore Jr. had called me just the coffee girl. He was right. And that's exactly why he never saw me coming. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of revenge served one cup at a time, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Samantha's position? Let me know in the comments.